is it possible to end daylight saving time? The time change is regulated nationally by the Uniform Time Act of 1966. It's written so states can opt out of daylight saving, and both Hawaii and Arizona did that right away. Florida has passed a law for permanent daylight saving time, but the federal law only allows states to opt out of daylight saving. So that Florida law can't take effect until the Uniform Time Act is amended. California, Washington, and Oregon are considering similar plans to Florida. Today, President Trump tweeted he would be okay with that. And Florida Senator Marco Rubio has sponsored a bill called the Sunshine Protection Act to make that change. Some states in the Northeast think they have a workaround. They want to shift ahead into a new time zone and then opt out of daylight saving, which is essentially the same thing as permanent daylight saving time. And right now, lawmakers in Louisiana, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas are all considering opting out of daylight saving time. Last year, Kenner State Representative Julie Stokes passed a measure creating a task force to investigate the change. Their findings will be discussed when the state legislative session begins in April.
So the answer is yes. We can verify that not only is it possible, the effort to make the change and stop springing forward and falling back is growing like never before.